General, thank you for being here. I appreciate you making the time.
Well, Rosemary, thank you so much for having me on.
I have lots of different questions, but I'm going to start with sort of the state of the armed forces. As you know, you've talked about so many times ongoing challenges with recruitment. There are currently, or last calculation that I've seen, 16,500 vacant positions, both regular and reserve. But you have also said that with the new defense policy review, we could need even more. I think you said as many as 14,000. So give me a sense about what the struggle is with right now with recruitment and what the hurdle seems to be.
So we're actually an institution on the upswing. And those numbers you just quoted, they are not correct. We are somewhere in the neighborhood of just shy of 15,000 regular and reserve under strength. After shrinking for 3 years, we actually grew this last year. And we started this fiscal year, beginning of April, in a much better recruiting situation than we have for a number of years.
And why is that?
And so I am cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
You know, why is that? We've got more applicants coming in. We've streamlined the process. Post-COVID, we're able to get out, do the face-to-face recruiting much more. We have many initiatives underway with respect to recruiting. So again, cautiously optimistic, but we're not going to take our foot off the gas.
Did the permanent resident thing make a difference, opening up that process? Because I know a lot of people applied, and the last time we saw numbers, it was a very, very small number that actually had gotten through.
So it has, but it's still untapped potential. Okay. And what I mean by that is let me back up. In terms of Government of Canada security regulations, everyone with foreign affiliation requires an additional level of security clearance. So this isn't just a military problem. This is a Government of Canada problem for which we are leading the way in fixing it. And so we've recently brought in some new initiatives to streamline the process. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with Eyre to take that immigration data, personal data, and move it to us. You think sharing information between two government departments would be easy?
No.
No, not so much. But that's one initiative, new software for security clearances. And we are bringing in a probationary security clearances as well. Okay. All in an attempt to get that untapped pool of talent into our ranks. Hey, let's face it, 23% of this country is foreign born. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have to leverage that pool of talent if we're going to survive into the future.
What about the dress code? Back in, I think it was September of 2022, you loosened up some of the rules around that. Face tattoos, colored hair, longer hair. I don't know if that made a difference, and I've also heard there's a chance you guys may be pulling that back a little bit now.
Yeah, so let's be careful not to make more of this than what it is. In this country, we have probably seen more societal change in the last 10 years than in the last 50 combined. And so every organization out there is struggling with the new generation, changing demographics, changing norms and expectations. And we must have the courage to experiment. And that's what we did. We indicated back in 2022 when we made these changes that, yeah, we'll continue to adjust as necessary. So just last week, we've issued some additional direction to adjust those standards, and we'll continue
Like what? Give me an example of what's no longer on the table.
Just put a maximum length on beards, for example.
Okay.
This has made some profoundly uncomfortable, based on the generation they come from. Others from a newer generation are completely at ease with it. And so we're treading a bit into the unknown here, and we have to be willing to experiment. And if it doesn't work, well, we adjust.
Yeah. Speaking of things where you have to deal with the unknown and changes of culture, you arrived in your position at a time when sexual misconduct was really a huge story in the military. In fact, that's kind of how you got the position. The person that was supposed to do it was forced to step aside. Did you realize at the time how big a problem it was? Because you've been in the military for 40 years. Had you seen this kind of thing? Like, did you know culturally there's something that isn't working here?
Well, again, it goes back to that societal change that we've seen and the realization as to what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable has evolved over the decades. And so never pass up a crisis as a good opportunity, as an opportunity to change. And that's exactly what we've done. We've kept our foot on the gas with respect to evolving our culture, and so that it can be an organization that can attract and retain talent from all segments of Canadian society. You would be hard-pressed to find an organization in Canada that has put more effort into understanding itself, understanding its culture, bringing in external advice, experts, and a desire for change. We've got many initiatives on the go right now. Far too early to declare success. In fact, I doubt we'll ever declare success because Canadian culture continues to rapidly change, and we have to change with it. And so there is no end state. It's a steady state of change and evolution.
One of the things, though, that was not put in place, I think it was back in January, was the duty to report requirement. It's around sexual assault, misconduct, and also racism that would require people to report on their colleagues. And a lot of people felt that that took power away from victims themselves. When is that actually going to happen now, that change?
Yeah, so the announcement of it going away was made last year. The formal repeal will come very shortly in the next several weeks to the months ahead.
And what kind of difference do you think that will make?
It'll give us a sense of more confidence that victims have agency to be able to discuss their cases with others without the fear of triggering formal action.
A lot of the people that were caught up in this, and I won't name names because there's various legal proceedings happening, were kind of your generation. And I wonder what it was like to see some of them get either rightly or wrongly caught up in this.
So this was probably the most stressful aspect of this position, and there's been a lot of stress, given what's going on in the world. And this is very tragic. Tragic for the victims who've lived, in some cases 30 years carrying this burden. Tragic for the respondents who've had families and lives destroyed. So there are no winners in this, besides lawyers and some journalists. It's a very sad situation.
Let's talk about some of the conflicts in the world right now. You have talked about a turning point in history. You've pointed to China, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Wonder if you could just give me your overall assessment of the threats the world is dealing with right now.
So we're seeing a confluence of threats that history has perhaps not seen before. And I characterize four of them. So geopolitical, climate change, technological, and the accelerated change in technology, and then societal. And as I said, the societal change that we've undergone, and the rise of disinformation. Geopolitical, we're seeing increased alignment between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. The norms of international sovereignty, the rules-based order that was put in place in 1945, which has avoided great power war, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1945. The norms that uphold that are being eroded. They're being eroded in Europe. They're being eroded in the Pacific, in Asia Pacific, and that needs to concern us all. We're at a point now where the currency of international relations is hard power. Hard power underpins diplomacy. Hard power underpins our credibility with allies. Hard power is the only thing autocrats understand and are afraid of and can be deterred by. And it underpins perhaps our most vital national interest, which is the prosperity of our country. We're a trading nation that is dependent on stability and certainty in the international order. With uncertainty, with instability, we are going to suffer. You think we've got economic problems now? If we can't collectively deter with our friends, partners, and allies adventurism, expansionism, imperialism in that international system, we are in for a world of hurt.
So let's talk about what that hard power looks like. Last month, 23 U.S. senators wrote to the Prime Minister expressing deep concern that Canada had not yet reached its 2% NATO target. Right now, the government estimates it'll be 1.75 of GDP by 2030. How much frustration has been expressed to you about the fact that Canada still doesn't have a plan to meet that target?
So my colleagues in other countries do not express that frustration to me because they know it is a political decision. And quite frankly, from my perspective, a percentage of GDP spent on defense is an input metric. And I'm far more concerned with what I'll call output metrics. Capabilities and readiness, that money that goes in that produces. And then those capabilities and readiness must be applied to the threat. So doing threat-based planning and to have the equipment, the capabilities we require, the readiness that's required. If you take a look at our new defense policy, that gives us the strategic framework, the geographic focus, the focus on readiness. So not just bright, shiny pieces of equipment, but the people, the equipment, the training, the sustainment that goes behind it. That is what we need.
I get what you're saying, but do you think that the 2% goal is the right one?
You could, again, using threat-based planning, and that the capabilities and readiness that are required, if you get those capabilities and readiness from 1.5 or 3.5% of GDP, I don't care, as long as we get those capabilities in place.
Okay, but you have also said, quote, uncosted items and capabilities cannot remain uncosted.
Exactly.
Because some of that defense policy was very clear where the money was going, and some of it was not. Yeah.
And so that defense policy, and again, the strategic framework is exactly what we need, but its success is going to be predicated on three things. One, implementation with a sense of urgency. Two, bringing those uncosted items, but committed to, into the fiscal framework. And three, growing our personnel numbers beyond the currently authorized and an additional 14,500 that we need for those new capabilities.
The French president is building a coalition of countries willing to train soldiers inside Ukraine. Of course, Canada's already doing that in Latvia. Would we be able to send soldiers into Ukraine? Do you see an advantage to training soldiers directly inside the country?
Well, prior to February 2022, we were doing just that while Ukraine was still fighting. Right. And so when the conditions are right, as per the security assurance that we signed with Ukraine, at some point it'll be right to go in and train Ukrainians in Ukraine.
What would those conditions have to look like?
Well, mainly concerned with force protection. What the security situation is, and what are the political conditions, correct?
Like, would the conflict have to be over, I guess, is what I'm asking.
We would have to assess that. And defining over is important as well. Sure. I've sometimes used the Korean Peninsula as an analogy for Ukraine. It's a frozen conflict. There is no peace treaty. It's an armistice treaty that was signed in 1953, and it's still a region of high tension. Yeah. And so, let's face it, Russia has been humiliated in Ukraine, and there are there are few human emotions more powerful than humiliation. And so, if Putin was to drop dead tomorrow, there would still be a challenge from Russia to Ukraine. And so, long-term support for Ukraine and its democracy is important. I'm very proud to say that as I go around and see our soldiers training Ukrainian soldiers, they tell me it's the most meaningful thing they have ever done. 4 weeks ago, I was over in Europe, in Latvia, and I saw our soldiers training 50 Ukrainian officers in staff procedures, and every one of them incredibly motivated. They know that their work has purpose.
I don't think you're a guy who really likes talking about himself and all the things that you've done, but you are 40 years in the military. You've served in Afghanistan, in Croatia, if I'm not mistaken. And I wonder what you're thinking about now as you get set to leave what was not just a profession, but what was your life's calling, I think it's fair to say. How are you thinking about that?
Well, as we were talking about before this, it's the gamut of emotions. It is relief, ability to catch my breath. It is fear about stepping into something and taking off the uniform, something. Including my time as starting Army cadets at the age of 12, I've been doing forever. It is a little bit of guilt because the world is in such a deteriorating situation, but also it's an understanding that what we have to do is beyond the tenure of any single CDS, and everybody's library card expires at a certain point, as our last CAF Chief Warrant Officer has said frequently.
Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done for your country. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, General. Thank you.